Before we dig in, a quick thank you to the sponsors ready to grow with the Soil Sisters. Tejas Tonic is the official beverage of the Texas Soil Sisters. We especially love that the hemp for Tejas Tonic is organically farmed in the Texas Hill Country, with farms in both Dripping Springs and Lukenbach, Texas. The Soil Sisters podcast is powered by B&P Electric. Whether you're building, remodeling, installing low-voltage landscape lighting, or in need of an inspection, B&P is your Central Texas electrical contractor. Find links to our sponsors in the podcast show notes or head over to txsoilsisters.co. You're listening to the Soil Sisters podcast, where we dig in on family farming and ranching, regenerative agriculture, healthy living, and planting seeds in our community. We invite you to listen, subscribe, and grow with the Soil Sisters. Hi, y'all. I'm Joanna Newting, joined today by my blood, soul, and soil sister, Crystal, for day one of the Southern Family Farmers and Food Systems Conference. Everyone, welcome to the show.
Super excited. Excited to have you here, Darren.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So we've got Darren Clark in the house. He is the Director of Land Conservation for the Texas Agricultural Land Trust. And we have a lot of questions about conservation easements, how they work, the truth of them, how they benefit folks, what are some of the misconceptions people have. And so, Darren, we know that you are the man to unravel this tangled mess for us. So just give us a brief bio and your backstory, and then we'll jump in.
Happily to do that. First of all, appreciate this time that I get to spend with y'all. Love talking about conservation, especially conservation easements. My background, I'm a South Texas boy, grew up in Webb County, Laredo, Texas, grew up farm and ranch. Agriculture has always been a huge part of my life. Went on, got a degree in range science from Texas A&M University, then went to work for the Soil Conservation Service, which later became the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and did 33 years with the agency. When I retired, I was in the state office in Temple, working with conservation easements and overseeing that program for the state of Texas. 2021, I retired and had an opportunity to continue working with private landowners, farmers and ranchers here in the state of Texas. Position I have now with Texas Agricultural Land Trust as the Director of Land Conservation. So coming up on 5 years next month of doing it. I enjoy it. Otherwise, these would be my retirement years, and I would be fishing or chasing grandkids or something like that. So,
well, when you said you retired, I'm like, how long did that retirement last before the next gig started?
It lasted exactly a month.
Oh, golly.
Yes.
Well, our goal today is to have you share insights from all of that time that you spent with the NRCS and now working with private landowners to really help people figure out how to responsibly steward the land and make it profitable so that it can continue to the next generation. Crystal and I are fifth generation on our family's land, and we fall into that generation of folks that were getting pushed off the land. Like, we don't want this life for you. We don't think you want this life. And so now it's our age group that's like, okay, our parents are almost 80 years old and somebody has to do something. Who's going to step up? What is the next move? And so just figuring out what that path is to be a generation that leaves the land better than we found it and making sure that it is profitable so it can keep going.
Yeah, and what you've just shared is very common. We're at a place in Texas, and I suspect, all around the country, that our landowners are reaching an age where they're starting to look and go, I guess I'm not going to live forever. I need to start figuring out what's going to happen to this place. I look at it as you have landowners that the property that they are managing or stewarding may have been in their family for generations, like your situation. You have others that maybe they've not owned the property as long, but they've worked really hard to get the property in the condition that it's in. And the thought of that being undone after all those years of blood, sweat, and tears, it's very uncomfortable for them. And when you start looking at the opportunities that are available to help with them in their decision making, a conservation easement to me is one of the best tools that's in the conservation toolbox. And I say that because conservation easements for the most part are perpetual, and perpetual is just a fancy word for forever. And so a landowner can have that peace of mind knowing that long after they're gone, that conservation easement will protect that property. It will keep it in agriculture or open space wildlife, and they are assured that no matter who owns that property, whether it's generational kids, grandkids, or at some point the property gets sold, that conservation easement is always going to be attached to that piece of property and protect it. And the biggest thing they're trying to do is protect it from development.
Yes.
That's become very popular. You know, you're seeing data centers, you got solar farms, you got wind energy. Even at the corporate level, I mean, you're seeing big corporations as they're expanding, they need land, and they're not making any more land.
Yep.
And in Texas, the majority of our land is privately owned.
Correct.
So when you see the development and you see the data centers, that land was purchased from a family
Sure.
to get to that point. So there is a lot of power in the landowner's hands, but it's like, I don't think they're all aware of the tools that are available because they feel like, okay, well, at least if I sell this land, I'm going to have money to give to my kids or something. Like they feel like they're doing it for their family.
Sure.
So let's talk about like what the conservation easements are, what they're not, you know, what the misconceptions are, the benefits. So in whatever order it makes the most sense to start painting that picture, let's do that.
Okay. Well, let's start off with what a conservation easement is. And I tell people when you think of the term easement, for a lot of people, it generates this instant idea of being an easement like an access easement or an opportunity for, you know, a pipeline easement, something like that. The reality of it is I see it more as an agreement. It's a voluntary agreement where a landowner can choose to place restrictions on the property that are perpetual, that are forever, and it ties their good intentions to that property in perpetuity. So the idea being that if they want that property kept in agriculture or open space wildlife, that conservation easement gives them that opportunity to do that. For our land trust, we're very flexible. We tailor each one of those conservation easements to meet the needs of the land and the goals and objectives of the landowner. And in doing so, we want to give them as much flexibility as we can, because not only do we want to protect the land, but we want to encourage them and give them what they need to continue to produce an ag commodity or manage it for wildlife. And so the conservation easement deed itself, it is a real estate transaction, but it's not a conveyance in fee title, meaning that the landowner still owns the land, but they are voluntarily putting those restrictions on that gets filed in the courthouse of record. And so moving forward, it doesn't matter if it's the landowner that put the easement on or their kids, grandkids, or somebody else, those restrictions will always be a part of that property. We get asked, well, what's the difference? Why can't I just put some restrictions in my deed when I sell it? Well, you can, but the challenge is when you do that, there's really nobody to enforce it. And over time, some of those restrictions can get lost or overlooked, and though the landowner may have had good intentions, they're not getting followed. With a conservation easement, you now have a deed holder, which is typically a land trust, that is now responsible after the easement closes to carry out stewardship and enforcement. So that gives that landowner the peace of mind knowing somebody is looking out for their interests long after they're gone. And again, these are perpetual easements, and that's basically how the conservation easement works.
So if the family puts a piece of property in a conservation easement and then they pass away, Texas Agricultural Land Trust. We've put it in through TALT. So someone from that organization comes by annually? How does that work? How do you make sure that what's happening is what's supposed to happen?
So that's a great question. So the answer to that is the way we carry out our stewardship and enforcement is every year we will contact the landowner and schedule a visit to the property. We would like the landowner to be there because for us it's about the relationship. And we want to be out there with the landowner. All we're doing is making sure that what was put in that conservation easement deed is being followed. And for us, we do not have management in our conservation easement. We do not tell the landowner, this is what your stocking rate should be, or you're having a problem with an invasive species, you need to get out there and treat it. The management part of it, we feel like is best left to the landowner because they're the best steward of the land. That is their role. Our role is strictly to make sure those good intentions that were put in that conservation easement are being followed. So at a minimum, once a year, if the landowner says, hey, I'd really like you guys to come back out again, that same year, we're happy to do it. But at the end of the day, a minimum once a year.
And so what happens if they aren't doing a good job stewarding the land? There's no development on there, but the land is not necessarily being taken care of.
So when it comes to the management or the use of the property, again, like you said, as long as there's no development or there's not anything in there that would conflict or contradict what the intentions were from that conservation easement, then it can be an opportunity. Our staff all have either a wildlife or a range science degree, so we're all technically sound. We can provide some technical guidance, some assistance. We can also point them in the direction where to get other assistance, such as there's assistance available from the NRCS, from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, maybe even Texas AgriLife, possibly some universities, but there are sources of assistance that's out there, and part of our job is to connect the landowner with those opportunities.
So it's not like Big Brother putting their thumb down. It's like, okay, here's some options. These are some things that might work for you, and you're just like a broker of good relationships for the landowner.
That is a key word. It's relationship. We're a family. And we're family first, whether it's amongst us as staff and an organization, or we also include our landowners as part of our family. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. We're not there to be dictators or controllers or anything like that. Again, we want the landowner to be the decision maker. We just want to provide whatever assistance that they want from us.
I think this is a good segue to talk about who is behind Texas Agricultural Land Trust, how and why it started. So if you could just share the roots of the organization.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. So in Texas, there's currently 36 or 37 land trusts that operate. Texas Agricultural Land Trust began in 2007, and at the time there was not a agriculture-minded land trust. So the Texas Farm Bureau, Texas Wildlife Association, and Texas Southwest Cattle Raiser Association got together and said, hey, we need a land trust that will provide that opportunity for our agriculture-minded, wildlife-friendly landowners. So that's where we began. And to this day, the way our bylaws are written, each one of those entities continues to have 5 members each on our board of directors. So we still have a heavy relationship with those 3 entities, those founding partners, if you will. Again, when the Ag Land Trust was formed, we wanted to provide as much flexibility as possible to the landowner to continue doing operations like they always have without us being a hurdle or a challenge. But we also have to keep in mind there are laws and regulations, and particularly if a landowner is going to take advantage of the opportunities that are available for tax benefits, then we have to make sure that what we're doing, what they're doing in their easement meets those regulations, particularly with the IRS. And likewise, some landowners will choose to use what we call a purchased conservation easement or a bargain sale, meaning that when we close the easement, they will get compensated for part of the value of the conservation easement. The funder now plays a role in that too, because we need to make sure that what we're agreeing to for that landowner, that we stay within the parameters of what the funder is intending. So it's a combination of all these partners working together. Okay.
Explain that a little bit more for me.
So every landowner is different. Every landowner's financial position is different. When we engage with the landowner initially and we're talking about what a conservation easement is and how it can be used, in that conversation, we will ask the landowner, do you know yet, are you interested in what we refer to as a donated conservation easement, or are we looking at a purchased conservation easement? And here's the difference between the two. On a donated easement, when we close that easement, the landowner does not receive any compensation for any of the value of the conservation easement. Usually in that decision-making process, it's the landowner's, again, comes back to their maybe their age or their health or some life event. There's some reason why they want that property protected as soon as possible. A donated easement, you can usually get done in 4 or 5 months. The purchased easement takes longer because land trusts typically are not sitting there with a bank account loaded with money just waiting for a landowner to come along. So what happens is after we engage with the landowner and they say, yes, I want to protect my property, but I can't do a donated one. I need to get compensated. I need it to be a purchased conservation easement. That's when we start looking at the funding opportunities that are available and try to match up that project with the right funder. And then we start working to get those funds. That adds more time to the process. So sometimes that can take 12 to 18 months before we're able to get that closed. And some landowners will say, hey, that's great. I'm young. I got, they think that they've got plenty of time. Not in any hurry. Let's go that route. And others may say, I want it protected because tomorrow's not promised, and I need that peace of mind knowing something happens, that property is protected.
So what's in it for the funder?
If you're working to build healthier soil and grow better food, every choice on your land matters, including how you manage weeds. And that's where Firehawk bioherbicide comes in. Firehawk is a fast-acting, non-selective contact herbicide that controls many common broadleaf and grassy weeds. Its active ingredient is nonanoic acid, a fatty acid that works on contact by drying out unwanted green vegetation, with visible results in hours, leaving no residual weed control in the soil. From gardens and homesteads to vineyards and regenerative farms, Firehawk can be used for careful spot treatments around crops, landscapes, and non-crop areas. And now, Firehawk is available in super concentrate, giving growers flexible, high-performance weed control that mixes easily with water. Learn more at firehawkbioherbicide.com and use code SoilSisters15 to save 15% on your purchase. That's SoilSisters15 for 15% off at firehawkbioherbicide.com.
So let's talk about the funding opportunities. So NRCS, as I mentioned, is one of those funding opportunities. NRCS is a federal agency. The Agriculture Conservation Easement Program began in the 2014 Farm Bill, was renewed in the 2018 Farm Bill, and everything we're seeing now, whenever we finally get a new Farm Bill, it will be continued. NRCS is focused on keeping working ag lands working. Correct. So that's what they get out of it, because that's what they're trying to accomplish. Some of the other funders have different reasons for that. There are private foundations that we work with. It just happens to be part of the focus of the benefactor. Whenever they started that particular foundation, whoever started it said, I'm really interested in protecting agriculture land or wildlife land in the state of Texas, and I want to do everything I can to ensure that years from now we still have land that people can run livestock on and manage for white-tailed deer. So they set aside money for conservation, and particularly for conservation easements. We do have some partnerships with some of those foundations.
So if we chose to do a funded over a donated, then as a landowner, what is my responsibility now to the funder?
Depends on the funder. Most cases, there's no requirement from the funder. So I'll give you an example. With NRCS, in those conservation easement deed terms, they have some minimum requirements. We would take those minimum deed terms, is what they're called, and we would incorporate that into the conservation easement to satisfy the funder. As a landowner, we would review that with the landowner and explain, the language in there, what it means, what those restrictions are. And then the landowner decides, oh, yeah, it really is not going to impact what I'm doing. I'm fine with it. Let's move forward. Normally, there's nothing that happens beyond that, because once the easement closes, now the stewardship and enforcement responsibility is on the land trust. With NRCS, when we make that annual visit, we do provide a report to NRCS saying that the current landowner, is compliant with the terms of the conservation easement. For most funders, that's all it takes. And there's possibly exceptions out there where, some funder may say, well, I want this kind of report, or I want this. But I like to say, you're familiar with the golden rule? Mm-hmm. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. So you just have to work within the parameters that the funder sets out.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking like, okay, with NRCS, those stipulations are probably around soil health principles. Or is it around, yeah.
I would say indirectly, but not directly, meaning that when you read the language, for example, if the property was determined to be eligible for the program because it's a grass property and it's being used for livestock grazing, there's language in there that limits the amount of property that can be broke out or cultivated. And again, it comes back to sod busting and back to the 1985 Food Security Act. So yes is the answer to your question, but it doesn't specifically say that. It's just the way that language is written. Indirectly, they are accomplishing the same thing.
Okay. And it can be different for every single land trust that's funded. Like it's property specific for the funder as to what this is going to be.
Correct. With the exception of, like with NRCS, those minimum deed terms, those apply to every approved project, and it doesn't matter which land trust is working. So NRCS requires that the landowner work through a land trust to use that program. So each of those land trusts will get the same minimum deed terms that NRCS has. But the difference would be when you work on the language for the entire conservation easement, that's where we work directly with the landowner, and we want their input. We want them to tell us, okay, what do you want? How restrictive do you want this easement to be? What do you want to allow for? And those are decisions that they get to make. And that's why I can say by now I think we're getting close to 80 easements that are closed. There's not two of them that are the same. Every one of them is different. And that's the nice thing about it.
Yeah. So what are some success stories? If there have been families that are going to lose their land and families battling over whether or not we do a conservation easement, and just give us a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that happens all the time. Here recently we closed an easement on it's one family, but the land was owned in separate ownership. Parents owned a tract, kids owned a tract. They both wanted conservation easements. They both wanted purchased easements. And one of the family members didn't really want a part of it. They either wanted their land or they wanted their money for it. And that conservation easement, purchased easement, provided them the funds to be able to buy out the sibling and keep that property operating as farm and ranch. Because otherwise, given the proximity that property is to urban area, to populated area, threat of development was huge.
Yep.
And had they not done that, they would have been forced to have to cut off that parcel to allow that sibling to sell it and get their money.
Yeah.
So, and that's common. It happens.
When there are these funded easements, what does that payout look like? Is there kind of an average? Is it per acre? How does that work?
That is a really good question. So typically, the funder will provide 50% of the value of the conservation easement. And I'll take a quick minute and explain how that value is determined. So with the value on the conservation easement, it is done by an actual appraisal. So it begins with the appraiser coming out, making a site visit. They look at the property just like if you or I were going to go buy a piece of land, and they determine what the fair market value is. And for easy math, I'm going to use round numbers. Appraiser looks at it and says, on today's market, the value of that property is $1 million. Then the appraiser will look to see, well, what's in that conservation easement? What restrictions are being put on the property? Well, the big thing is the development. So there's a huge value to that because those development rights are being terminated or extinguished. So the appraiser will take that into account. They look to see what the landowner's putting in there. Are you going to allow for future divisions, or is that property going to be kept in its entirety perpetually? Are you going to allow what we call building envelopes, where a landowner can designate certain areas, 2, 3, 4 acres, that they will have the right to come in and build a house or build some type of infrastructure for the ag operation? They take that into account. They look to see what the threat of development is. Are there other properties that are being fragmented or being developed? Determine, okay, based on all that, the value of that property is going to diminish from $1 million to $600,000. The difference between those two numbers is the value of the conservation easement. So my Aggie math says $1 million less 600,000 leaves you with $400,000. That would be the value of the conservation easement. The funder will provide 50% of that, or $200,000. So at closing, in this example, the landowner would get paid $200,000.
Okay. So if, and using our family land as an example, there's 5,000 acres left, and we have 9. I think there may be 9 people in this 5th generation that it's like, my concern, Crystal's concern, is we have to treat it like a business. You can't splinter it any further than it has already been broken up. So we would want to keep all 5,000 acres together, so any of it couldn't be split up. And so something like that, a conservation easement would make sure that happened.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I admire you for thinking that way, because if you think about it, the landowners today, the parcels that landowners have now, these came from parent tracts that were much bigger generations ago. And over time, they just keep getting split. So we've reached a point, like you just said, you've got, 5,000 acres. And if you can put that or designate that to stay intact and use that conservation easement for a tool, and that hats off to you. That's perfect.
And what about agritourism? That's something that, I don't think where we are in West Texas that, there's a huge threat of development on our property, but certainly there's been plenty of splintering to the point where other parcels are just owned by a doctor in Dallas who comes and hunts with his brother, or, somebody on the East Coast that, likes to shoot quail every now and again. And so they're not developed, but they're also not actively doing anything that's really stewarding the land. And I'm just curious how, if somebody wanted to do agricultural tourism and they have their farming and ranching operation, but being able to have the hunting operation, maybe wanting to build some small hemp house structures where you could have people there and do classes and teach stuff around stewardship and whatnot. Are things like that, is it all encompassing, or do you have to get that nuanced when you're working through this?
So I can speak for our land trust, and the language that we have in our conservation easement deed allows the landowner that type of flexibility, because we know, perpetual
Yeah.
Forever's a long
That's a long
time.
time.
And
Exactly.
things change, opportunities change, technology changes. And over time, we want to make sure the landowner is not handcuffed, that those opportunities that come up will allow the landowner to take advantage of that. So we do have language in our easement deed that will address that very thing and hopefully be as flexible as possible. Again, depending on the landowner, which route they choose, a purchased or donated easement, we just have to make sure that what they're wanting to do falls within the guidance of the IRS and the potential funder. And that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. Because I'm thinking whoever's putting this thing together either needs to be Nostradamus or like be able to write in such like broad strokes that you're not painting yourself into a corner.
Correct. And that's part of our role as we go through that and we're talking with the landowner about what they want in the conservation easement. We bring those things up because it's a huge decision. There is a lot to it. And we want to make sure, just like you're saying, that they get all the information, they think everything through. I'll give you an example. So if a landowner said, I'm really not interested in any building envelopes, they're going, well, okay, well, why don't you want a building envelope? Well, I've already got my house is over here and my barn is right there by the house. And for whatever reason, we're excluding that. It's not part of the easement. Okay, but just like you're saying, you can't see the future. Maybe your kid, grandkid, or somebody down the road decides, hey, it'd sure be great if we had, another hay barn back here in the back. Or I was talking to a guy earlier, and he said, he was talking about the size of his combine. And he said, even just farm equipment has changed.
Yep.
He said, the combine I have now does not fit in the barn that I had a few decades ago. He said, how do y'all address that in your conservation easement? I said, easily. We have a building envelope. Those acres are part of the easement, but it still has some additional rights, such as building. So if you would need to build or expand on an existing barn, you would have the flexibility to do that. But those are the kinds of things that we just want to make sure the landowner thinks ahead because, again, forever is a mighty long time.
Yeah. So we see the benefits of the funded version. What are the benefits of doing the donated?
Good question. So donated one, again, if a landowner is like, I need this done as quick as possible, I just have to know that tomorrow that easement, that property is protected with that easement. The donated one is quicker. The other thing that drives some people is there are some tax benefits from the donated portion. And again, if it's a donated and 100% or on the purchased one, because that was a question I usually get asked is, well, if I'm only getting paid for half of it, what happens to the other half? Well, that's when we suggest to the landowner, you need to work with your CPA or your tax preparer because current IRS regulations allow for the landowner to use that as a charitable donation because the land trust is a 501c3 nonprofit. They can use that as a charitable donation and a deduction for tax purposes. And the way it comes into play, particularly on the purchased one, when that easement closes, the closing agent, the title company, is going to issue a 1099 because Uncle Sam considers that payment capital gains. So they can work with their tax preparer, and the part that's donated, they can use that to offset the tax burden that would come on that payment. On the donated side, there are people financially that can use that whole 100% value of the conservation easement in other parts of their financial position. Current regulations allow the landowner to use the year the easement closes and the following 15 years for a total of 16 years to use up all of that tax benefit.
Nice.
Okay. So the funded part becomes more of if you have a squeaky wheel in the family and you have to pay them off.
Exactly.
Do they have to pay the taxes on that money?
Whoever the legal owner is
Of the ranch.
of the property,
Yeah.
correct.
Or the land.
Yes.
Okay.
So when it's closes, that's who the title company is going to issue payment to.
Okay.
But then if they're paying that out to the other sibling or whatever, then that would ultimately be them that was responsible.
I mean, but on that
Oh, yeah.
first tax year,
Yeah.
not. I don't even know how that. Then
We're just going to count on having no squeaky wheels.
100% buy-in's
There
what
you
you're
go.
going for.
That's what I'm talking about.
Well, and I don't know that a lot of people know this, but Texas is losing rural land faster than any other state in the country. And I mean, it is a full court press on every landowner in this state to build a data center or wind turbines or something. I mean, we drive from here to Aspermont pretty regularly, and the solar farms, and there's just so much going in. And so I feel like this either is a tool that people just aren't even considering, or they just don't know enough about it, because we need landowners in our state to wake up and figure out a better way to do this. So when you meet folks, like, what is your elevator pitch for these conservation easements?
So you're right. Texas leads the nation in the loss of agriculture land. We currently lose roughly about 900 acres a day in Texas. We also gain about 1,300 people a day in Texas. And I tell landowners, best to my knowledge, they're not making any more land, and we're losing it way too fast. And so when I talk to them, and usually what comes up, there's misinformation that is out there. And sometimes that reaches the landowner before they've had a chance to do their research or talk to somebody else. And so they're not really too interested, and they definitely don't have that level of trust because of some of the things that they have heard. I can tell you that for the last 5 years working for the Land Trust, and probably the 3 or 4 years before I retired from NRCS, the interest level in conservation easements as a tool for landowners has just skyrocketed. It just continues to go up. And I contribute that to a couple of things. One of them is, as more accurate, reliable information becomes available, I think landowners are picking up on that. And the second one that I think is even bigger, as more landowners use a conservation easement for a tool on their land, and they're able to tell somebody else about it, that means way more than anything that a professional that's doing it could ever have to say. Exactly. And that's why I see that interest level continue to go up.
Are there certain programs within NRCS that if you are in a conservation easement, you have access to?
I must say that there's not anything that having the easement gives you access to that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. But I will also say there is some misinformation where landowners, for whatever reason, have come to believe that if they have the conservation easement on their property, whether it was funded by NRCS or another funder or even donated, that they're not eligible for the other Farm Bill programs. And that is entirely incorrect. The policy manual for NRCS for their agriculture conservation easement program specifically says landowners still eligible for all Farm Bill programs, EQIP, CSP, and everything else that's available.
Okay.
I mean, that is amazing.
The regenerative pilot program included?
Anything that's a
Heck
Farm Bill
yes.
program.
Okay.
Yep.
That just makes perfect sense. Like, why wouldn't you do that? This is my question. Like, I want to do this right now. Like 5,000 acres. Let's go. That's what we want to do, is protect this land for our family. So why wouldn't you do that?
So then, on the heels of her saying that, how do people start this conversation with their families to broker the discussion, so to speak, around the benefits of the conservation easement?
So for our land trust, again, that was one of our founding principles, is we don't target any geographic area. We don't target any landowners. We're not salesmen. We don't try to talk anybody into doing something. Instead, what we do, as the word gets out, as we do outreach, as we have opportunities to visit with folks like y'all, people become aware of it. Some of them will actually get on the internet and do a little bit of research on their own, and others will just reach out to us directly and just say, "Hey, y'all do conservation easements. What is it? And tell me about it." So that's where we start that conversation. We have landowners, just like you just mentioned. They're like, "Man, this sounds great. Let's get started. I want to start doing this today." Okay. We have others that, I mean, it's a big decision. It is a real estate transaction, and it is perpetual. There's that fancy word for forever. And we understand that. So for others, it may not be quite as quick. We may have that initial conversation. Months may go by, even years. We'll have somebody that'll reach out and say, "Oh, yeah, well, we talked to your former CEO, and, I mean, she's been gone over 5-6 years, I believe." So sometimes it does take a little bit longer. But it begins with that conversation. And then when the landowner says, "Yes, this is something that'll benefit our family, we want to move forward, we're ready to do it." Then the other question is, okay, did y'all decide which route do you want to go? Donated easement or purchased easement?
So as we're having this conversation, I start thinking about succession planning, and so these being combined in that same conversation, I guess I'm just constantly thinking about our own situation.
Yes.
Because this is ultimately why we record this show, is to answer our own,
Right.
get our own questions
us.
answered. So, if you're having the conversation about succession planning and like what's going to happen to the land, who's going to be in charge of it. So the conservation easement, I guess, where do these things kind of fall into the conversation? And then ultimately, who's the one that's inking the deal? Like our father's, almost 80 years old. We've been slowly getting involved over the last 3 years. We have 30 acres of the land that they're like, "Okay, y'all just do what you want to do there for now." And so it's like we're playing in the sandbox on the ranch. But then how do we start making this all gel and be part of a succession plan? Do y'all work with somebody that helps with that?
So we have actually been working with that because succession planning and conservation easements do kind of work together. We'll have landowners that'll reach out. Same scenario. The landowners reaching an age that all of a sudden, "Hey, you know what? I need to figure out what's going to happen. How are we going to do this?" And as you're aware, over the last, since COVID anyway, land prices have just skyrocketed. They're just incredibly high. Well, the value of the property also dictates what the value of that conservation easement is. So they're extremely high as well. Landowners, when they start looking at and they start talking to their financial planner, how they're going to transfer ownership of this very valuable property to their kids and or grandkids. One of the things that they can do using that conservation easement, because at least on paper, it's going to show a diminution in the value of the property. Like that example I used earlier, you went from $1 million to $600,000. So roughly a 40%. Again, it depends on where the property is in the state of Texas, because that threat of development is really what drives the value of that conservation easement. So when they start planning and they're looking at this very high valued piece of property, having that conservation easement and now having an appraisal, you have a document from a licensed appraiser in the state of Texas that says, now that that easement has closed, this is what the value of that property is. And it can greatly reduce that tax burden from the transfer of ownership of that property. So that's how that comes into play.
Okay. With the easement and without the threat of development, we're saying it's dropping 40% the value of the property. Therefore, that's, yes. Okay, this makes sense.
And if I'm just going to kind of guesstimate, if you will, probably where your property is, 35 to 40 is probably my guess, without know exactly where it is, but I have a pretty good idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, so what are some of the things that we didn't ask you that you want to touch on? Because I know the misconceptions was one of the things that you talked about, with people being on TikTok and Instagram and 30-second clips of something, and it just, get shared over and over. And I don't know what a lot of the misconceptions are, so I'd love for you to just dive in with any of that stuff that I don't know about.
Yeah, I've got several I can share with you. And the first one is it is not a government takeover or land grab. There is nothing in that conservation easement that even suggests that. And I tell landowners, to me, it doesn't make any difference. Having that conservation easement doesn't make it more likely or easy for any level of government to take that property away. So I think that's a huge myth or misconception that's out there. Secondly, does not create public access. It does not become something where anybody wants to go out there and hunt or bird watch or whatever. They don't have that. That is one of the rights that stays with the landowner. It's still your land. You still control the access, who you want to let in or not let in. That is your choice, with the exception of the once-a-year visit to make sure that the easement's being followed.
Yeah.
A question that's very popular right now, I get asked all the time, if I protect my property with a conservation easement, will that prevent a transmission line from coming across my property? Will that prevent any entity that has the right to exercise condemnation or eminent domain from doing that on my property? Unfortunately, the answer is no. It will not. But what it does do, and this is what I tell the landowner, hopefully it will deter that entity that has the right. Because what I tell the landowner is, I would make sure that that entity understands that there are significant conservation values on the property, so much that you are willing to protect it with a conservation easement. Because of that, find another way to go around the property.
Yeah.
And we've seen success in that, particularly with the transmission line. The companies that are involved with that have been very understanding and have worked with our landowners, not just our land trust, but other land trusts as well, where there is property protected with a conservation easement. They've done I'll say they've done a pretty good job of avoiding properties that have a conservation easement.
Excellent. I love to hear that.
So you had mentioned earlier when the Texas Agricultural Land Trust was started, you mentioned, the Farm Bureau and a couple of other people, but it was my understanding that this is a group of landowners that got together to start this.
Correct.
And then it was funded by these other three organizations. Will you name them again?
Yeah, so those three organizations are all landowner organizations: Texas Farm Bureau, Texas Wildlife Association, and the Texas Southwest Cattle Raiser Association.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was Daddy a part of this?
Yes.
I thought so.
I bet, yes.
So here's my question. Why would you not want to do this?
And I get asked that too. And the only answer that I can come up with, if a landowner is intending to sell the property and wants to maximize the amount of money they are able to get, don't put a conservation easement on it. Go ahead and do what you're going to do. And we understand that. Everybody's different. But there's a follow-up question to that. I get asked routinely, well, once I have the conservation easement on my property, what can I sell it for? And my response is, and I always tell them to begin with, it sounds like a smart aleck answer, but the honest answer is whatever you can get for it. It's like selling a used car. So I've already mentioned that they're not making any more land, and we have all this influx of people coming in. So in my opinion, I don't see the value of the property diminishing. What I see is your buyer pool shrinking.
Exactly.
Because now that the easement is on there, you've just removed the development rights. A developer's not interested in buying the property, can't develop it. Can't put a housing subdivision on it, can't build a solar farm on it, can't put a data center on it, can't sell it to, one of the big corporations to build a store on it or a parking lot. So to me, and we've had several properties that have changed hands since the easement was put on the property, and you'd be surprised. They still, most of them get fair market value. In fact, a gentleman came up to me earlier and we were having this conversation, and he experienced that with a neighbor and said, well, why did you buy that piece of property with a conservation easement on it? And the guy said, well, because it's already protected. I know I don't have to worry about that. I wasn't interested in developing it. I just want to be able to go out there and hunt deer and hunt quail. And now I have a piece of property that does that.
Yeah.
And I think the guy paid regular fair market value for
Yeah.
it.
Amen.
Nice. So for folks who want to know more, get more information, I know they can go to txaglandtrust.org. Do y'all do any sort of, I don't want to say seminar, but do y'all go around and do talks in local communities and whatnot?
We do, and actually last week we did a webinar. We did what we call an Easement 101, a virtual setting, and we had folks that registered and got on there. We recorded it. We can make the link available, and it's really a good opportunity because a lot of the questions that people have, they can hear the answers and then follow up with us directly, and then we go through pretty much everything I have just shared with y'all. We do sometimes set up an outreach event where we'll actually go do one in person, and then we get opportunities like this conference here to come and speak, or an opportunity to be on your podcast. So that's how we approach that.
So when people want to start the process, it's like, okay, we are interested. Does it start out with a field visit? Y'all come to the property and meet with the landowner at their property and then start working through what this contract's going to look like?
So the way we do this, we have that initial engagement, usually a phone call. Sometimes we do a Zoom or Teams meeting. And those are really good when it's an expanded family, rather than just having the parents or grandparents. The more the family that we can get and they all hear the same thing, rather than grandpa trying to explain it, it works out a lot better. But that's how that initial engagement begins. Then the way we're structured, our home office is in San Antonio, but we have most of our staff working remotely from their home office. And so when we start working with the landowner, it just makes the most sense whichever staff is closer in proximity, because they know that area. And it makes the landowner more comfortable.
Yes.
Would you rather have somebody come out that's, I already mentioned I'm familiar with your area. Have somebody come out that's familiar with where you are, or somebody come from San Antonio that for where your property is a pretty good haul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the approach that we use. And we'll go out and make the site visit, and then we have I think it's a 4-page application that we ask the landowner to fill out. And it's the information that they put in there that helps us to start that process, helps us to understand kind of what they're thinking, what they may want in their conservation easement, and we start doing our due diligence.
All right. Well, Darren, I sure do appreciate you and what you're doing and how you presented that. It's been helpful for me to kind of wrap my mind around how all this works.
Absolutely.
Well, thank y'all. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here today. And another thing I tell landowners, talk to more than one land trust. At least talk to 2, because there are similarities, but there's also differences. And it's, again, there's that word perpetual. So you want to have a relationship that is comfortable from both sides. And so I always tell landowner, hey, talk to at least 2 land trusts and figure out which one is the best fit for you. And if it's us, we're happy to do it. If it's not, we're okay with that too, because there is a niche for all the land trusts. Everybody has a role.
Yes.
Well, and now that I just said that, how do y'all make money?
Well, we're more of a service entity, if you will. It's not about making money. We don't really make any money off of any of this. What we do is, because we have to cover staff time and we're a nonprofit, and we use what's called a coordination fee. And so once we engage with the landowner and they say, yes, we are ready to move forward, let's get this conservation easement done to cover our staff time, we have a coordination fee.
Okay. And is that just a flat fee, or is it based on the deal?
Flat fee. Once upon a time years ago, it was kind of an hourly thing. But the challenge with that is if you tell a landowner, here's what the hourly rate is and here's what we expect it to be, and when we get done, if you're not close to that, they're like, oh, hey, wait a minute. I remember you saying it was going to be this, and now it's this. So several years ago, the board said, hey, let's just do a flat fee, and then everybody can work with that. And it's been okay that way.
All right.
Excellent.
And you're not retiring anytime soon?
I'm not. I enjoy it. I get asked that, and I was told when I came to this position that you're going to enjoy this. It is a lot more fun. You take off all the government bureaucracy and everything that comes along with that. 100%. I just love working with landowners. I love talking about conservation easements.
Well, I love that because you're protecting land in Texas, and that is 100% what we're wanting to do with our own family's land and then help other people do with their own. So you are a wonderful stepping stone to that.
Well, thank you. And I think what y'all are doing is great too, because the more people that you're able to reach with this platform, it's just fantastic.
Thank you.
Connect with the Soil Sisters at txsoilsisters.co. Submit questions, guest or show ideas, and sponsorship inquiries. The Soil Sisters podcast was created and produced by Joanna Nuding. Editing and sound design are in the capable hands of the PodConnects Podcast Network.